and I call the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The only reason that this legislation is needed is because of the Morrison Government's many failures to actually guide us out of the pandemic and to put the things in place to see us through the next period. And, workers and self-employed people all need to know that there is a financial safety net there if an outbreak stops their city. And while a lot of this has been focused on Melbourne and Victoria, in Sydney right now, I bet there are lots of people wondering what might happen if the outbreak Sydney is experiencing spreads, and we find ourselves in the same position in Greater Sydney as Melbourne and Victoria have. And what it strikes me as is a government that is unable to think ahead, unable to be one step ahead. They're always one step behind. It's like COVID's the queen and they see themselves as the consort, and never getting out in front, never being able to take us and show us that there is a plan to move beyond where we are now. When I reflect back on what has happened during the pandemic, from the start, we were really pleased as an opposition that we encouraged them to listen to the science early on and recognise that there was a need to deal with this as a health crisis, and then to think about the need for wage subsidies so that people could do the right thing to save lives. And the community responded magnificently to both those things, recognising that they were needed. Now, I have no doubt that around the country it was the community that did this, with decisions led and pushed for by premiers, and that spared us from the worst health impacts and, consequently, the worst financial impacts. I have to say, it feels like it was little thanks to the Prime Minister or the aged care minister, if you go back to those very early days. And I think about aged care because my dad is in aged care, and you look at how vulnerable people were, people in their 80s and their 90s, or even those who were vulnerable in their and not in good health in their 70s in aged care. The premiers had to step in and try and deal with, at that time, a very much unknown situation. And they didn't get any help from the feds, such little support at a federal level. And that attitude has continued to this day around aged care. I think people will look back on how this government responded in that aged care sector with absolute dismay that it could have been done that way. The other clear failure, there was a good decision made that the premiers were essentially left to do, and that was to convert empty hotel accommodation to quarantine accommodation. Yeah, good call. What we've realised, though, and what we've known for some time, is that the setup of hotels is not conducive in all cases to an effective quarantine system. Now, this isn't new. We didn't just work this out yesterday. We have known this. And the contrast is clear when you look at Howard Springs, something set up with quite independent units that allow people to not have to share infected air. Now, when you've got 24 leaks from quarantine, you'd think somebody would work this out. But yet again, the government's been a step behind, never a step in front. It's clear we need dedicated quarantine facilities so we reduce the chances of this sort of disaster payment ever being needed. The vaccine is the other area where there have been failures. I know governments don't like to admit failures, but this government, more than any, is unable to recognise its mistakes. The rollout has been an embarrassment, with only 3% of people fully vaccinated and about a quarter partially vaccinated. The rates of aged care workers and disability care workers is still not really clear, and not even the rates of residents in disability care. We should have all that data. It should be at our fingertips. We should be able to look at it and go, OK, there's a problem here, how do we address it? This fear of admitting they haven't got it right means it just comes across as an arrogant approach. And particularly when we've been in opposition, wanting to work with the government, wanting to bring forward the problems that we see and help find solutions to them. I mean, I wonder why we still don't have really good mobile facilities, particularly for areas like mine on the edge of a city where you're a long way from the hubs that have been established in New South Wales. And I'm getting a lot of comments from people in their 40s and 50s who are finding out it's going to be a really long wait for their Pfizer appointment. And clearly that's because supply has been an issue. You can't deny it. You can't pretend that, oh no, it's all good, because it just hasn't been. It hasn't been. It hasn't even been equitably distributed amongst the states. You know, you wonder, okay, could that have been done differently? Well, yeah, we were saying you needed more deals. You needed to do more deals for a variety of vaccines, knowing that they might not all be perfect. And hasn't that proven to be the case? You know, a deal with Moderna, fancy not taking the offer of additional doses of Pfizer. All those things are clearly errors that have been made. We should also be making mRNA vaccines here, or looking at how we do that, in doing it as quickly as we can, because I don't think anyone thinks that pandemics just suddenly turn off. We know we've got a road ahead of us, and that's why not only do we need a plan, but we needed to really have information, and that's the other huge gap from the Morrison government. It's a lack of information, especially given the changes in the vaccine, would have given people a place to be able to clearly and succinctly find out what they need as things change. There's been such a lack in that, let alone the motivating, inspiring campaign that would have had people of all ages flocking for vaccines. Now, when your supply isn't good enough, maybe that's why you don't want that to happen. But information, a public health information campaign, is the massive vacuum that's been left. And it's allowed people like Clive Palmer to fill the vacuum with the rubbish that he says, stuff that is dangerous. And yet we're not even seeing action from the government to correct and mitigate that misinformation that's been pumped out all around the country. That's a failure of this government. So what we need is action on all these steps, and we need a plan that will see us be protected, that will see new arrivals quarantined effectively, a plan that allows for stranded Aussies to come home, a plan that reduces the risk for others coming in, like the much-needed skilled workers and students. A plan that takes us forward, just doesn't leave us. Right now we're left in limbo. We need a plan that puts us a step ahead, not just a step behind. And I think a plan that shows this government doesn't think the job is done, because right now it feels like they've done all they're going to do. We've got these little bits of tweaking like this legislation. It's really time for the government to take the way, show us the way forward. We are really happy on this side to input into that plan. And if there were true bipartisanship, that's what would be happening now, that we would work together. They don't like to work together. I will take that interjection. They don't like to work with us, but we've demonstrated in the last 15 months...
There's no such thing as a legitimate interjection, so you don't get to choose whether you take it or not.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I will respond to that interjection, which is a choice I get to make. And we can be pedantic about language, should we choose. So that's what I really urge the government to do. We need to feel like we're moving forward right now. The country's in limbo and many people are just way behind. It's really time to work with us rather than just skite about what you think you've achieved.